What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. And as always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. And today I'm here to discuss my key observations and takeaways from the Green Bay Packers 11th training camp practice, which took place on Sunday afternoon. This one was closed to the public, and it was also their first practice since their first preseason game against the Cincinnati Bengals. But before we dive into those observations and takeaways, as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. You can find all my work over at Packers Wire. And please hit like on the video. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. So now let's dive into those observations and takeaways. This was a bit of a shorter practice, which not surprising at all compared to what we had seen over the last week or so. The Packers are entering a really big week right now. Matt LaFleur talked about this before practice began. They have the two joint practices upcoming on Wednesday and Thursday with New England. They have the preseason game against New England on Saturday. They also have a Monday practice in there as well. So going to be a very, very busy week for them. So today was a little bit on the lighter side in terms of time. They also did not have the pads on, but we still saw some competitive 11-on-11 drills, which is where the bulk of these takeaways come from. But first, let's start with the injury rundown. Who was not on the practice field? David Bakhtiari was still not out there, and neither was Jaire Alexander. Jaire, we learned on Friday before the Cincinnati game that he's dealing with a groin injury. That is still why he was not practicing during Sunday's practice. But we've also been told by the Packers PR that this is not a serious injury, just being very precautionary at this time. Tyler Goodson, he left Friday's game against Cincinnati with a shoulder injury. He did not participate. He was in a sling. Lou Nichols, who's been out for about a week and a half now with a shoulder injury of his own, was still not on the practice field. And then Turner was out, as was Luke Tenuta and Caleb Jones, offensive tackles, who also left Friday's game with ankle injuries. And then, of course, Eric Stokes is still on the physically unable to perform list. Players who were back in the mix, we saw Ennis Gaines back on the practice field. He had suffered an injury during family night to his quad. Missed all last week's practices, did not participate in the preseason game, but he was back out there. Jake Hansen, we saw back out there as well. He's participated in, I think, just one practice this summer and before Sundays. And then Josiah DeGuara, I know he came back, I believe, during the joint practice against the Bengals last Wednesday, but on Sunday, he was fully participating in the 11-on-11 drills with the Packers for the first time since suffering that calf injury. So that's who is out. That's who is back on the field. In Jaire Alexander's absence, we again saw Carrington Valentine lined up on the boundary across from Rasul Douglas. And noteworthy at the tight end position, because the Packers are very shorthanded there right now. If we're talking about truly healthy tight ends, they have three at this moment: Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and Austin Allen. Now, Henry Pearson and Josiah DeGuara, they could fill in if needed, and perhaps they will be a little bit more, but both are listed as fullbacks, and ideally in this offense, that's the role that they're going to take on. So shorthanded at tight end for the time being, the Packers moved Dre Miller to the tight end group during the individual drills. Dre Miller was signed, I think it was a week into training camp this year. He had spent the offseason with the New York Giants, where he had played tight end. Now on the Packers roster, he's listed as a receiver. He's been practicing with the receivers up until today, but obviously the Giants saw some tight end skill set in him, and that's the similar move that the Packers made, again, with them shorthanded at the position. Miller's a 2022 undrafted rookie out of Maine, had 104 career receptions in college, averaged almost 18 yards per catch. Really impressive. Most of his snaps came on the boundary, but he also has slot experience as well. And for what it's worth, had a very, very good run blocking grade from Pro Football Focus. So just sounds very much like a Packers type player, but he was taking snaps with the tight ends on Sunday, again, because they are shorthanded. And with them being shorthanded, Matt LaFleur said that, they're going to have to rely on Austin Allen a bit more for the time being. And, he's going to have to take advantage of those opportunities. And when the Packers were in their 11-on-11 drills, Josiah DeGuara was, as he has been, the second tight end out there with Luke Musgrave when they had two tight ends on the field, which has been quite often. One other note on the tight end position, Matt LaFleur did say prior to practice that, Brian Gutekunst and the scouting department, they're they're looking around the NFL now, surveying the landscape of free agent tight ends to see who's out there. For one, again, the Packers need an additional body, most likely, to even just get through practices, to get through preseason games. On top of that, it wouldn't hurt to find someone who's a capable run blocker. That's a role that Tyler Davis very much filled. As I've said on here before, to me, he's been the most consistent. He's been the best blocking tight end in training camp this summer. And the learning curve for tight ends coming to the NFL, so Musgrave and Kraft specifically, is very, very steep, especially as blockers. So if the Packers can find someone who can provide at least a little stability in that regard, I imagine that they're going to try to bring him in here for the remainder of the summer. And who knows, we'll see what happens from there. Moving along to the offensive line, as I mentioned, David Bakhtiari was not participating, so the starting offensive line unit was pretty standard for the most part. We had Zach Tom at right tackle, John Runyon at right guard, Myers at center, Elton Jenkins at left guard, but then we had Rasheed Walker at left tackle. He's been playing left tackle for most of training camp, but with the second unit, obviously, had a really, really strong performance on Friday against the Cincinnati Bengals. But typically when Bakhtiari hasn't been practicing, we've seen Yosh Nijman at left tackle. But it was Rasheed Walker today. And the primary guess that I have as to why it was him over Nijman is because later on in practice, we saw Nijman with the starters at right tackle. So perhaps the Packers just wanted him getting those reps, going through practice, just focused on the left side, because it is really a difficult transition. I know we think it's offensive tackle, but moving from one side to the other, it's not as easy as it looks, obviously. And when discussing this topic, I always think back to Josh Sitton, former Packers offensive lineman, who said switching sides of the offensive line is basically like going to the bathroom and wiping your butt with the opposite hand. So perhaps that puts it in a little better perspective on how difficult that transition can be. So maybe the Packers just wanted Nijman to start having some practices where he's just solely focused on being the right tackle to really give him a legitimate shot, at that competition with Zach Tom. Of note, Josh Myers continues to primarily be the starting center. Matt LaFleur said they need to see more consistency from him. I've said on here before that I do think the competition is much more real than what I had originally anticipated, and I still do think that. However, even with Zach Tom getting some snaps here and there with the starters at the position, right now this still very much looks like it's Josh Myers' job heading into the, once we eventually get to the regular season. Obviously, a lot can change from now and then. He's going to have to continue to become more consistent. But just based on the number of reps and where Tom primarily is, to me, it just looks like this is going to be Myers' job to at least start the season. Obviously, from there, things can very much change. In the Packers' first 11-on-11 session, we saw a lot of 21 personnel, which is 2 running backs on the field. And the second running back on many of those snaps was Patrick Taylor. It was either Jones and Taylor or Dillon and Taylor. And he did a really, really nice job as a lead blocker for either Jones and Dillon, getting to the second level, helping to create some additional running lanes for those 2 running backs. And, I keep going back to the quotes from Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst, and when asked, and they've both been asked multiple times, what are you looking for in your third running back? It's special teams and it's blocking. And Patrick Taylor may not have the same explosiveness as Tyler Goodson, or maybe not have the same offensive upside as Lou Nichols, but he checks those boxes, and we know he does. He's very reliable in pass protection, picking up blitzes. He was a core special teams player for Green Bay last year, playing over 120 snaps. So let's not forget about Patrick Taylor in this third running back mix. And again, going back to the injury update, right now Goodson and Nichols are both sidelined at the moment. Also at the running back position, and now after Friday throwing their hat into the ring for that third running back role, is Emmanuel Wilson. He was taking snaps with the second team offense with Sean Clifford at quarterback. And before practice, Matt LaFleur said that Wilson is going to have to show consistency on special teams as a blocker, on special teams and as a blocker. He's going to have to take advantage of the opportunities that come his way. When the snap counts from Friday first came out, one of the first things I looked at was how many special team snaps did Emmanuel Wilson play, and he didn't play any. Not to say that that isn't going to change moving forward. I mean, just given how thin the running back room is at the moment, he's probably going to have to, but he's going to have to show that he can handle those responsibilities. And Matt LaFleur also said that it can be difficult for young players to come in and play special teams, especially guys who were, star players or key starters in college, because when you're a key starter in college, you're not seeing a ton of snaps on special teams. So now when you get to the NFL, you're learning a whole new role, essentially learning a whole new position. And that very well could be the case for Wilson, who's coming out of a D2 school where he was the, one of the go-to guys for that offense. So something to keep our eyes on. He had a really, really impressive performance, threw his, hat into the ring for that third running back role. With injuries, he's going to have the opportunity to build upon it. But as I always say, or have said over the last week or so, when we're talking about this third running back battle, watch how they perform in pass protection and watch what they do on special teams, because that's going to be the deciding factor. When you have Aaron Jones, when you have A.J. Dillon, you don't necessarily need guys who can come in and be, the primary ball carriers on offense. That's what those players, that's what Jones and Dillon are there for. So how is that third running back going to contribute? They're going to contribute on special teams. Next up, Luke Musgrave. He was a big target of Jordan Love's during the preseason game, and only 10 attempts from Love in that game. 3 of them went to Luke Musgrave. Again, he was heavily targeted today, especially over the middle of the field. That is where we are really going to see Luke Musgrave and his just ability leverage. On a couple of the throws, Musgrave was coming across the middle on a crossing route and did a really nice job of finding that soft spot behind the linebackers, but still in front of the safeties. And Love did a nice job on 2 of those throws to get the ball to him for some decent completions on those plays. So that's going to be a big part of the field where we're really seeing Musgrave and his size and his athleticism leverage. Whether you put him in the slot, whether you put him on the boundary, he's going to create mismatches. He's going to be too big, too fast, in many of those scenarios. And when you get a guy like that going over the middle of the field, it creates catch and run opportunities. We saw on family night, we saw during the Bengals game, those deep crossing routes, they're really trying to get him the ball down the seam is going to be another area of opportunity for him as well. But big play potential coming from Musgrave over the middle. And as I've talked about before, as a whole, we're going to see Jordan Love in this offense attack that part of the field a lot more than what Aaron Rodgers did. The pads weren't on, have to add that caveat, but I thought that the offensive line had one of their better practices in terms of pass protection. There were some where the pocket was collapsing a little bit, or Love had to escape or buy time. But for the most part, I thought this offensive line today or Sunday did a lot better, or was much more consistent, I should say, than what they had been in previous practices. Jonathan Ford, he's battling for the 6th interior defensive line role. He had another good practice. Matt LaFleur said, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now, he's upped his game this summer. We've seen it, flashes here and there through the start of training camp, but it's really becoming more consistent. He had a couple nice run defense snaps and even a pass rush against the Bengals. And again, today he had another nice run defense snap where he just basically blew up the play in the backfield before it could even get going for A.J. Dillon. So really, really well done by Ford and just continuing to build upon that momentum. The question is, are the Packers going to keep 6 interior defensive linemen? On one hand, it all starts with the run defense. In order for this defense to improve this year, they have to be better against the run. And Jonathan Ford can be a backup nose tackle to TJ Slayton, filling that role at 6'5", nearly 340 pounds. However, where I have maybe some hesitation that the Packers would keep him is because of the play at Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks. Both the rookies have continued to play well over the last few weeks. And when we talk about interior defensive line rotations, you just don't really see that many that rely on 6 defenders consistently. So for those reasons, I wouldn't call him a lock yet, but Jonathan Ford is absolutely controlling what he can and doing everything that he can to make enough noise to earn a roster spot. And one other point on the 6 interior defensive line rotation. Yes, he can provide help against the run, which the Packers very much need. But if they find themselves in a truly, got to get off the field running situation, it's going to be TJ Slate and it's going to be Kenny Clark. I still don't see, even if he's on the roster, as Ford being one of those go-to guys. He's going to be in there as a, rotational player, maybe playing 10 or so snaps a game against the run. So it's just something to be mindful of. But like I said, he's doing a very nice job of continuing to make these flashes become a lot more consistent. The practice ended with a 2-minute drill. It was end of game situation. There was 1:45 left on the clock, and the offense started at their own 20-yard line. Down 7 points. And overall, I thought the drive that Jordan Love was able to put together encapsulated well what we saw from him overall in the practice from a performance standpoint. He did a really nice job taking what the defense gave him. There obviously wasn't a turnover, and I wouldn't even consider there being a turnover-worthy play on his part. The Packers ran a lot of quick outs, which obviously makes sense in this situation, to use the sidelines to stop the clock. Again, it was a 2-minute drill. The defense is, playing a little bit more back because they want to prevent that big play over the top. So that's a lot of times where the opportunity is going to be for the passing game. Love did a really good job of taking advantage of that. And he was able to help lead the offense into the end zone. They were at the 13-yard line. There was 20 seconds left, and Jaden Reed was able to get behind Keyshawn Nixon, and Love did a really good job of dropping it in between the back of the end zone, but also out of reach for Keyshawn Nixon, only where Jaden Reed could get it. So overall, I thought it was a really nice drive. In the situation, that made the score 28-27. The offense was down by a point. They went for 2, but unfortunately did not get it. It was on the far sideline from where I was, but looked a little bit like a fade route from Romeo Doubs to the back right corner. But Love and him were not able to connect on that. But overall, thought it was a well put together drive by Love and the offense. Again, if I had to put a bow on it and summarize it, took what was there, quick passing game, out routes, and they were able to navigate their way down the field. If you want a play-by-play of what that 2-minute drill looked like, head over to my Twitter account. I got everything up over there. Few quick notes. Jaden Reed, he just continues to be more and more consistent, making more and more plays with each and every practice that goes by. Matt LaFleur mentioned after the Bengals game that, even when the play is breaking down or the protection isn't great, Love just looks very calm. Matt LaFleur said he was poised, confident, in leading the offense. And I think you definitely you see all of that, in practice as well, when the things are breaking down or he has to, create a little bit on his own. You definitely see a calm and cool quarterback back there leading the offense, which is obviously what you want to see. During the 2-minute drill, some of the regular starters were not playing. I noticed that Preston Smith wasn't out there. Elton Jenkins wasn't out there. And this created some opportunities for young players or others fighting for playing time. So with that starting offensive and defensive units, we saw Brenton Cox out there, Tarvarius Moore, Keyshawn Banks, Carl Brooks. The offensive line combination was wildly different than what we've seen previously. Josh Nyman was at right tackle. They still had Josh Myers at center, but we saw Zach Tom at left guard in place for Elton Jenkins. So a few of those other players getting a run with the starters during the 2-minute drill. And one thing I want to add about Tarvarius Moore, just because Matt LaFleur had spoken about him before practice, he really commended Moore for his physicality. He said that there were a number of plays in the Bengals game where he was the second guy to the ball to help make the tackle and limit the play. So really good to see from Moore. He appears to very much be solidified as that third safety right now behind Jonathan Owens, behind Darnell Savage, but we saw him get a few snaps with the ones today as well. Matt LaFleur talked about how there's going to be a rotation at this position during this time of the year as they try to find not only who's going to make the team, but who's going to see playing time. And I keep waiting for more, to get some more opportunities. But for the time being, it does look like it's Owens and Savage who are the starters right now. And on the flip side, that means that Rudy Ford has fallen to the fourth option. It was a kind of happened kind of quickly. I mean, through offseason programs, he was next to Savage. Even at the start of training camp, he was next to Savage, but he very much appears to be the fourth man in the rotation right now. And, he was brought here last season to be a special teams player, to be a flyer. He's been a very good one in that capacity, but definitely seems like Jonathan Owens and Tarvarius Moore have passed him in that regard. The second team offense, led by Sean Clifford, uh, doing the red zone drill, ended pretty quickly, unfortunately. Brenton Cox had a few nice pressures that were ruled sacks, but again, we saw the up and down nature as we did in the Bengals game from Sean Clifford. On one play, he threw a near interception. 2 plays later, he threw probably the best pass of practice. Tucker Kraft was running down the seam, and Clifford delivered just a beautifully placed ball between 3 defenders to Kraft. Unfortunately, I'm still not sure why, because I was watching what was happening downfield, but the play was negated. I'm not sure if it was a false start. I do know that there was some pressure around him, so perhaps they ruled it a sack and he wouldn't have gotten the pass off. But either way, it was a really, really beautifully thrown ball, a beautifully placed ball by Sean Clifford. At edge rusher, Justin Hollins was with the starting defense alongside of Preston Smith. And we can look at snap counts during the preseason games as, it's a data point. It's far from the be all end all, but the fact that during the preseason game, Hollins was again starting across from Preston Smith and that he played only 7 snaps, just to me further cements that he's going to be on this team. I know I've talked about it here before. He's not a roster lock from a cap perspective. If the Packers cut him, they incur a dead cap hit of just $155,000. Obviously, a very small amount when we're talking about the NFL salary cap, but he's consistently been playing with the ones, was good against both the run and pass last year, took on a leadership role, said Jason Rebrovich. He's been seeing some starting snaps with the special teams unit. And then we look at the preseason game. He was out there for 7 total snaps. That's what you do with a guy who's going to be on the team. He has a defined role. You know what you have. And now you give him a little bit of action, but you don't want him to get hurt ultimately. That very much feels like what they're doing with Justin Hollins, which again says that he's absolutely going to be on this roster. Last thing I want to touch on, the wide receivers at the back end of the roster. Malik Heath, from what lineups he's in, whether it's the first or second team, the number of opportunities he's had with those units, very much looks like he's ahead of Bo Melton for that 6 wide receiver role. Now, where it potentially gets interesting is, that 6 wide receiver, their role on offense is going to be very small. There's 5 receivers ahead of them. The tight ends are used heavily in the passing game. The running backs are used heavily in the passing game. So special teams contributions, like pretty much every back end of the roster player, are going to be really important. And when we go back and look at that Bengals game, Bo Melton had 12 special team snaps to Malik Heath's 1. So I do think Heath has stood out more on offense as a pass catcher. He's seeing more opportunities with the starting unit, with the second unit, than what Melton has. But again, when it comes to their contributions to this roster, probably not going to see a ton on offense. So they're going to have to contribute on special teams. And right now, through the first preseason game, that definitely is in the favor of Bo Melton. So just something to keep our eyes on. Lastly, Grant DeBose made a pair of receptions today with the third team offense. One of them, a touchdown pass from Alex Magoo. Obviously going to be important for him with getting such a late start, that he continues to make plays, continues to show consistency, to give himself an opportunity to be in that wide receiver 6 conversation. Like Matt LaFleur said, there's nothing that can replace the actual live reps, especially for a young player. And up to this point, DuBose has missed a lot of them. So there you have it. Those are my big observations, my key takeaways from the Packers training camp practice on Monday. They'll be back on the field, or on Sunday, excuse me. They'll be back on the field on Monday. Joint practices Wednesday and Thursday, preseason game Saturday. It's a busy week. It's a fun week. I look forward to coming back and sharing it all with you guys. As always, follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. You can find all my work over at Packers Wire. Hit like, hit subscribe. I do greatly appreciate it. And as always, take care, stay safe, and go.